You are listening to Any Given Sunday, a part of the Dead End Podcast Network. Please subscribe to our podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google, and all other podcasting services. Please make sure you check out Dead End Hip Hop, Dead End Sports, Dead End Gaming, Is the Mic Still On, Chris Platt's Strictly Hip Hop and Hoops Talk, and a host of other shows on our podcast network. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show. For Thursday, March 7th, 2019, this is Any Given Sunday, the Thursday edition, and I'm your host, Manny Brown. Well, don't adjust your sets, your dials, your televisions, your computers, your phones, wherever you're listening to this podcast. This is the Thursday edition of the show. Unfortunately, as you guys know, we weren't able to give you guys a podcast episode this past week or this past Sunday. Had some technical difficulties. It's just one of those times where technology decides it does not want to cooperate when it's supposed to, and it makes it very difficult on us to do what we love to do. So it's just one of those days. Had to charge it to the game, man. So I took the L and weren't able to release a podcast episode this past week. But I figured I'd make it up to you guys and release 2 episodes of the podcast this coming weekend. Got 2 shows, one dropping tonight, hopefully if I can get it up in time. If not, definitely tomorrow morning. And then I have another show that I'm recording tomorrow and posting tomorrow night, hopefully into Saturday morning. So a double dose of AGS for you guys out there to make up for the lack of show this past week. So yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed. I think I got 2 really good guests lined up for you guys that I hope you guys enjoy. But the first guest of the weekend is the great New York Jets beat writer, Mr. Darryl Slater, who's been covering the Jets for about 6 years now. He is a columnist for the Star Ledger, and he also writes for NJ.com, and he vlogs and posts video updates about all things New York Jets on NJ.com Advanced Media. One of the most plugged in Jets beat writers out there. It's a guy that I've wanted to have on the show for a while and just couldn't line up our schedules, but we finally got it, and I'm really happy to have him on the show. Darryl, welcome to Any Given Sunday. My name is Manny, and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Thank you. We were just talking offline that I think we're both longing for the days of some nice weather, right?
Yeah, I can't wait. Yeah. It'll be nice to get to the sweltering weather at training camp. That'll be fun.
You know, you're going away from Florida for a couple of days, so I guess you'll get a little tease of it. Some of us still have to get stuck in the winter for a couple more weeks, right?
Yeah, I got a couple of days in Florida, and then for NC gets rolling. So
again, thank you for being on the show, and let's just get right into it. Just kind of give a brief bio of yourself, man. I've been watching you and following your work for years, but there's maybe some folks that may not know you or obviously aren't Jet fans, so they're not familiar with you. But just kind of give them a brief bio of who you are, how you got your start in the business, and how you came to covering the Jets.
Yeah. Well, I covered college football and college basketball in South Carolina for probably 7 years or so. Did that from basically 2006 to 2013, covered Virginia Tech, Virginia, University of South Carolina, and got a chance to see some really good players down there. Covered Jadeveon Clowney in college, and that was a lot of fun. Steve Spurrier, and that was a great experience. And then I'm from upstate New York, so and then in 2013 I got the chance to come up to work at the Star Ledger and NJ.com in 2013. So I've been covering the Jets since just before the 2013 season started, and been a cool experience, and no playoff games yet, but certainly plenty of drama to cover. Obviously it's a great place to live. So that's sort of how I ended up covering the Jets. Getting an opportunity to come up here in 2013. So this is the third coach I've covered now. So let's see how Adam Gase compares to Rex Ryan and Todd Bowles.
So what you're saying is staying on the Jets beat, right?
Never a dull moment.
So I think everybody knew it was time for Todd Bowles to go, right? I mean, it was 4 years. 3 of those years were absolute disasters, including a last place finish this past year. How did you feel about the Adam Gase hire, though, initially? I think I want to say the majority of the Jets fan base was not happy with the hire. I think including myself. It's grown on me a little bit as the weeks and months have gone by. How were you initially to the news of Adam Gase becoming the New York Jets head coach?
I don't think it was necessarily ideal, but I think he presented a lot of the positives that, there's a reason he obviously got fired in Miami. Right. He did not do a good enough job relating to the players down there, and he didn't win enough, obviously. So, But I think that he has enough of the qualities when combined with Greg Williams. So he brought in a really good defensive coordinator. So that was a must. And I think he has enough of qualities that you feel like maybe he can develop Sam Darnold, which is priority number one. And one thing about Gase is he's never had a young quarterback to work with. He's always had kind of older guys, and some of those older guys like Peyton Manning were great, and others like Ryan Tannehill not as great. So I think this is a really unique opportunity in terms of Gase's career. And, I think I could see the hire, in terms of the personalities. That's my, I don't know about concern, but I think you just look at it, and if you're a Jets fan, you think, a type A guy like Gase, type A guy like Greg Williams, how are they going to get along?
Right.
Then you put Joe Vitt into the mix on defense. How is he going to get along with Greg Williams? So I think, there's a chance for this to be very dramatic. But if Sam Darnold develops and plays well and the Jets put enough quality pieces around him, team taking strides, maybe be an 8-win team this year, maybe a 9-win team. I don't think they're going to win 12, 13 games, but the whole point here is progress.
Right. And just on the coaching hire, like a lot, obviously when big coaching changes and hires happen, there's a lot of media stuff that goes around. As a fan, you're not sure what to believe. Just in your reporting and everything that you've kind of researched and looked into this, was Adam Gase their first target? Was he their guy all along? I know that they had some flirtations with Matt Rule from Baylor, and then of course you had Mike McCarthy, who was very interested in the job. So just from all your reporting and just researching, how did this hire how did it all go down? Was it just ownership making this call? Was it a Mike McCagnon and ownership combined call? How did this all kind of play out?
Yeah, Mike McCagnon consulted on the search, but ultimately it was Christopher Johnson's call. And, I don't think they'll ever really say who was the first choice per se. But, as they went through it, I think they liked Gase's experience as an NFL head coach over Matt Rule. And there were some staffing concerns with Matt Rule about how he would fill out his staff, which is obviously a critically important part of becoming an NFL head coach for the first time is, how do you fill out your staff? And I think with McCarthy, they thought, maybe some of his ideas were not as fresh as Adam Gase's. There were a lot of things that went sour in Green Bay and also in Miami. But in terms of McCarthy's ability to kind of motivate a team at this career, his message had kind of, grown stale there. So I think they felt like Gase had the right mix of NFL head coaching experience, even though he doesn't have a ton. He has not been a proven winner over the long haul, and the right mix of that, and also of quarterback development. And the Jets really fell in love with that part of it, and we'll see if they wind up being right.
Let's get into Sam Darnold a little bit. Did Sam meet all of your expectations coming into this season, or did he exceed them, or did he not live up to them? I mean, how would you assess Sam Darnold's first year in the green and white?
Well, I think with any rookie quarterback, you have to set pretty low expectations. I mean, rare is the case where a guy will come in and light it up, even though we've seen a few of those rookie years in recent years, Dak Prescott and really not even Patrick Mahomes, because that wasn't his rookie year last year. So right. It's really hard to come in and start from day one. Really, really hard to do that and to thrive. And, I thought Sam Darnold did about what I expected. He showed some flashes of potential. He had some hiccups, and he did what the Jets, have raved about, which is he rebounded well from adversity, and that is really important. He was able to stay steady throughout his rookie year. I think he probably performed about as well as I would expect. Now, I think he's got a really good chance of being a really good quarterback, but we'll see. I mean, I don't think it's set in stone yet that he's going to be the guy for years and years. He has to continue to progress, but I think he saw enough signs down the stretch that in those final 4 games after he returned from his injury that maybe he can be that guy, but it's still too early to say there are signs.
When you're trying to analyze this team, obviously the number one priority is to put pieces around Sam Darnold and to build this team around him. Obviously we're all in on Sam Darnold being potentially the franchise quarterback right now. Before we kind of get into free agency and the draft and all that, what do you see as the biggest need for this team right now? Whether they fill that need in free agency or through trade or through, the draft, of course. What do you see as the biggest pieces that this team needs to make biggest acquisitions they need to make to take that next step and put a team around Sam Darnold?
I think offensively it's the line, because if they can't run the ball more consistently than they did last year, if they can't protect this kid more consistently than they did last year, they're not really going to give him much of a chance. regardless of what skill players you put around them. Their line was not good enough last year. They cut their center. They're going to let their left guard, James Carpenter, walk in free agency. So, they have to replace those two positions with veterans. I mean, it's not a situation where you can draft to fill either of those positions, because you're not going to draft in the first round to either of those positions. And you don't have a second round pick right now. So the Jets have to fill center and left guard. Regardless of what they do with Le'Veon Bell or the running back position, those are two critically important pieces that I think a lot of people are, maybe if you're a casual fan, overlooking a little bit amid all the talk about Le'Veon Bell. Defensively, edge rusher has been an issue, whether it's you talking about the defensive end in the 3-4 or that outside linebacker position, rush outside linebacker position in the 3-4. It's been an issue for this team for years. I mean, you think about the guys they tried to get to fill that spot, going to Quinn Coples, going back all the way to 2012, and some of these guys that just have not panned out for them, and they have to fill that spot. And the problem is, obviously in free agency, we all know that all the guys who got franchise tagged and are not available, whether it's Frank Clark, Davian Clowney, DeMarcus Lawrence, D Ford. So. I think there's some opportunities for the Jets here, whether they want to, go after a Josh Allen. And now, if Nick Bosa falls to them at 3, it's a no-brainer. But if Josh Allen or Montez Sweat, or they go with Quinn Williams if he's available there, and a lot hinges on whether Kyler Murray goes first. So, in terms of free agency, you're looking at guys like Zadarius Smith, Dante Fowler, kind of some lower profile guys who, in the case of Smith, I think Fowler's the higher profile guy, is kind of underwhelmed. Right. I think that's a huge, huge issue. They have to get to the quarterback more than they have.
Speaking of the defense, there's been a lot of talk of what the Jets are going to do with Leonard Williams. It's interesting because, I feel like most of the Jet fan base likes Leonard Williams, and I think that they feel like he's a good player, but they feel kind of underwhelmed by him, that he hasn't quite lived up to that impact potential that he was, billed coming out of SC a couple years ago. Where do you stand on Leonard Williams? And is there any talk of them maybe trying to dealing for a second round pick? There's been a lot of talk about the Jets trying to, regain some of that lost collateral that they lost, obviously that they lost with the Sam Darnold trade up last year. So is there any chance that the Jets are maybe considering dealing a Leonard Williams?
No, they want to keep him. They do not want to deal him now. Maybe that has to do with the fact that they put some feelers out and they don't think they could get a second round pick from him. I would be surprised if a team would give up a second round pick for him for the reasons you kind of mentioned. I agree with that he's a good player, but has not been a number 6 overall in the draft type player. He's been impactful at times. He gets to the quarterback. His quarterback hits to sack ratio is insane. He's a lot of quarterback hits, not a lot of sacks, and has not kind of taken that next step to being an elite player. He's been very good, but we'll see. They're going to pay his 5th-year option this year, and he'll be with the team in what will be the final year of his contract. We'll see. But I would be surprised if they franchise tag him next offseason, unless he has a monster year. Maybe he does, but. It's sort of the same situation as Muhammad are similar, where Muhammad Wilkerson did have better sack numbers, but went into that 5th year, and then they franchise tagged him the next year and gave him a big contract, and he never panned out. And I think it's different because the attitudes of those two players are very different. Muhammad Wilkerson's personality and attitude is much different than Leonard Williams. Look, Leonard Williams is a good guy, conscientious guy. He works hard. I just don't necessarily know if ultimately he has what it takes to be an elite pass rusher in this league, and which is fine. You could still be a very good player, but I agree, with your assessment there. That a lot of Jets fans have of this guy. Good, very good at times, but has yet to take that next step.
Right, and I think a lot of that also comes with the immense hype that came with his selection, and obviously he was a guy that a lot of people projected to be probably the best player in that draft at the time, or at least one of the top 3 players in that draft, and then of course having the opportunity to get him at 6. I think a lot of people kind of expected a Joe Watt. Or not a Joe Watt, but a Watt kind of performance from him, and he just hasn't lived up to that.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt.
Yeah. What about Robbie Anderson? There's also been a lot of talk about maybe Robbie Anderson. I know they offered him they tendered him a 2nd round pick. Do you see any way where the Jets maybe let Robbie Anderson go?
No, I think they'll keep him this year in the 2nd round tender, and I think he'll sign that. I'll make about $3 million on a 1-year deal in that second round tender. They like him, and they don't have a lot of receivers right now, so they can't. I mean, that's a good deal for a player of that level to have that, only a $3 million cap number for a year. They like him. If he can keep himself between the lines off the field in terms of not getting into trouble. Obviously, he had a couple of arrests and didn't amount ultimately to any suspension because all those charges either got thrown away or knocked down. But he's got a lot of talent. In some ways, he is a one-dimensional player, yes, but he does what he does very well. And I think Adam Gase can find a big role for him in this offense. And if Sam Darnold can continue to progress and he can get some time to throw the ball by an offensive line that ideally will be improved, then I think you could see Robbie Anderson definitely taking a step forward here in 2019. And then next year is the year that he'll try to cash in. Well, this year he'll try to cash in for next offseason. So, but yeah, he'll be back this year playing on that second round tender because, nobody's going to give up a second round pick for him in restricted free agency.
Right. And what about Quincy? I for one, I'm a little frustrated with Quincy because he's one of my favorite players, especially on offense. And it's just like every time you feel like he's taking that next step, he's about to take that next step and blossom into a star, an injury happens. Mm-hmm. Obviously, this year he had that issue. Obviously, 2 years ago he had the issue with the neck, and then this year has some injury issues as well. Where are you with Quincy Enunwa? Do you think he still has the opportunity to be that player that I think a lot of Jet fans see in him, or is he a guy that, is just always going to have these injury concerns?
Well, I think, his ceiling's probably that of a number 2 receiver or, number 3 or number 2, at best number 2. He's not a number 1 receiver, which is fine. You can make a good living in the league doing that. And he can block really well and he's physical. So he gives you some things that maybe your typical number 2 receiver wouldn't give you. He's so, they see the guy in person. He's a tremendous athlete and he's plays so physically. And the neck injury was kind of a fluke thing, but, even he said that he pushed and pushed and pushed and kept pushing that deal before, until it got really bad. And so I think one thing he's learned from this with a neck injury and then the ankle injury this past year, ankle injuries, is, to know when to kind of, not push as hard. And one thing with that ankle injury, I think the worst one, he had a couple, and the worst was a high ankle sprain where he didn't go down. Someone was tackling him from behind and he didn't go down. And he's like, I got to know, he said later, I got to know when to go down in that spot. And, I can't, because trying to push it like that can make an injury happen like that, and it did. So he wound up getting a pretty good deal from the Jets, all things considered, and they like his potential. But yeah, he's got to stay on the field. He has to stay on the field, otherwise he's not going to be worth that contract. He's not going to be able to help the team, and he's not going to have a long career in the NFL. So some of these injuries, more of his fault, I guess, than others. But I think he recognizes there's things he can do to prevent them, and but he certainly keeps himself in really good shape, and he's a good asset in terms of a complementary receiver who can block. So he's got potential. He's not a number 1, but that's why the Jets need to go try to get a guy like that. And if they can, they'll be in really good shape if they can pair a guy like that with Quincy Enunwa and Robbie Anderson.
How much pressure is on Mike Maccagnan this season? Obviously we talked about Bowles and his tenure, but there's a lot of Jet fans that kind of felt like Maccagnan was kind of maybe let off the hook a little bit. He didn't get enough heat for some decisions, some roster construction decisions that weren't great. His drafts have been at best uneven. I think most people would say that. Where does he stand in this organization? And if this year a lot of pressure is on him to kind of finally deliver on putting a good team together?
Absolutely. They don't win a few more games this year, he's getting fired. That's the bottom line. His contract runs through 2020 because after the 2018 season, it was extended by 2 years through the end of 2020. So, yeah, look, this is a huge year for him. He has to. This free agency period is enormous. He cannot afford to give Le'Veon Bell a monster contract and have the guy come in and be a complete dud like so many of these monster contracts he's given out have been.
Right.
Maybe you think about Darryl Slater, Muhammad Wilkerson, or even Tremaine Johnson so far. We'll see if Tremaine Johnson can kind of right the ship, but his track record's not good for giving up big deals. Remember, the Jets have a ton of cap space this year, but they had a ton of cap space last offseason, and what did they do with it? They got Tremaine Johnson, Terrell Pryor, and Spencer Long, who were duds, all three of them. Isaiah Crowell, who was, okay. He had one really good game.
Yeah, he wasn't that great.
He wasn't. He wiped his butt with That was the main thing he was known for. And then, obviously lower profile guys like Avery Williamson, good signing there. The picking up of Robbie Anderson in the draft in 2016 after the draft when he was undrafted. Good job there. But on a whole, it's just not enough in terms of, you look at the middle rounds of the draft, and from 2015 to 2017, I wrote this today, Cagnon drafted 13 guys from rounds 2 through 5. And really only 3 of those 13 have turned out to be players. Brandon Shell and Jordan. Look at some of those 10 other guys are just littered brutal names. Lorenzo Malden, Dylan Donahue, Devin Smith, or Darius Stewart, Chad Hansen. I mean, that's 4 of the 10 right there. I keep going, but people know these names. They know these failures. I mean, M builds his roster by the middle rounds of the draft. I mean, anybody can get a good player at number 6, but what do you do in the second round, third round, fourth round? Those are money rounds, and Mike McCagnon has not hit on those.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you hit it spot on. It's amazing when you look at some of those mid-round selections and how bad he's whiffed on those. It's almost scary to think about. But why do you think Tremaine Johnson flopped so hard in his first year? I mean, he's a guy who's had a track record of being a pretty good player. Probably the Jets overpaid for him as these things tend to be sometimes in free agency. But why do you think he flopped so hard his first year?
That's a great question. I mean, that's a great big question for him. I mean, some of it is his own doing. I mean, he was not focused at times, and I mean that was obvious. You could see it on the field in Jacksonville, and he got beat deep, and then of course, showing up late. That's a horrible look at the end of a bad season. He was hurt at times too, remember, to be fair, he had, I think, that quad strain that sidelined him for a few weeks. So, he did deal with an injury. But in free agency, that's the thing. You're overpaying for guys that other teams are willing to give away. Not just other teams, but the team that went to the Super Bowl last year is willing to give this guy away and let him go in free agency. And that's what happens in free agency. Teams that don't do a good enough job of roster building through the draft have to overpay for other people's cast-offs. It's kind of a blunt way of putting it, because sometimes you do get a really good player that shakes free, but there's a reason these guys are allowed to be let go, and that's why free agency isn't necessarily always the cure-all. And I think Tremaine Johnson is Exhibit A for that. So tied to him through probably 20 because of the nature of his deal, because he got such a big signing bonus. To get out of it after 2019 would be pretty painful. So it's really, if you look at the deal, you talk $72 million. He's not going to see all of that. Probably not. But it's really a 3-year, $45 million contract.
Wow.
And so he'll end up seeing every penny of that $45 million. And I mean, if he doesn't do something this year, then he's going to be an albatross hanging around the Jets' neck entering 2020. And it'll be another black mark against Mike McCagnon's on his record. I think, he's not a lost cause yet. Let's see what he does under Greg Williams, because remember, he played well under Greg Williams in L.A. And Denard Wilson, the cornerback, the secondary coach for the Jets now, was in L.A. too with the Rams. So maybe they can cook up something that can get this guy to kind of get it going.
Do you still have faith in him that he's going to figure it out, or you're just kind of, I don't know?
I don't know, man. I'm skeptical. I guess I'm just skeptical in general. But I think there are, like I said, if you look at the facts of it and just look at it pretty, try to look at it objectively, that he's playing now for a coach he had success for in LA, and maybe that'll be helpful.
So you talked about it a couple minutes ago. The big name that everybody has pinpointed to the Jets really since it feels like since the start of last year is Le'Veon Bell. How do you feel about Le'Veon Bell and the Jets pursuing him? If you would have asked me this question last year, I would have told you I would have been all gung-ho about getting Le'Veon Bell. Obviously, a lot has happened since the start of last year. Where are you with the Jets pursuing Le'Veon Bell? And ultimately, do you think the Jets will pursue and sign Le'Veon Bell?
I think they'll pursue him, and I think they'll get him, and I think they'll give him a ton of money, and it'll be more than he should get. But I think he can still be productive. I don't think he'll necessarily produce fully to the contract level, because it'll be a significant deal. But I think he could be helpful for them. The problem, you kind of alluded to it, like last year, you look at it and say, oh yeah, this is a guy that maybe next offseason. But then he did something that really no guy has done. He sat out the whole year. He wasn't hurt. Yeah. But what kind of shape is this guy in? He missed a whole tread on him from playing in that year if he had a 300 carry year. But I think that the flip side to it is, is he in football shape? Is he in football rhythm? Obviously he'll have time to get back into shape and get into rhythm, but, he's been difficult at times in terms of, to deal with. And also, his drug suspensions or whatever, and he doesn't have the off-field issues of Antonio Brown, but, fair or not, whatever got him in the substance program, that kind of hangs over in terms of one more of those situations the league could come down on him really hard. So I don't know what the next thing would be for him if he is, or if he's even cleared through the program. That's part of his resume. And ultimately, do you want to pay that much money for a running back? I mean, he's really talented. He's really, really talented when he's on, when he plays, when he's available and healthy, and he can do a lot. But how many years does he have left? He's got a lot of mileage on him. So there's a lot of concerns there. Again, they're in a position where they didn't do a good enough job. Like, if they got Isaiah Crowell like last year, and he turned out to be a great player, and that's a bargain if you get him for that money. But now they've got to go out and spend on this guy who's got a little bit of an unknown factor to him because he didn't play last year. So the Jets are in a position where they can't afford to really be picky or to be patient, because they do have this young quarterback who they want to take advantage of his early talent window here and put some pieces around him and let him develop. So that's the tough part of it.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. The element that scares me about Le'Veon Bell is such a boom or bust aspect to him. I can see him getting a big deal and somewhat living up to it, or I can see him just completely being a disaster. And that's a scary process with the Jets, especially a team that's had a long history of just having some bad free agent signings. You mentioned it with Jermaine Johnson being the latest one, it looks like. What about Antonio Brown? You mentioned him briefly. Not as much connected to the Jets, but although the Jets have been thrown around as possibly having an interest in him if the right deal came along. Would you be in favor of that? I know you've written about it and talked about it on the site, but just kind of elaborate further on Antonio Brown, and would the Jets possibly pursue him?
Well, they called and they checked in on what the price would be, and they decided against pursuing him. They've dropped out of that. Not that they were ever really big players in it, so they won't be getting him, and they're not going to pursue him. And like, the price that has been bandied about is a first round pick. So it's like, no, like, there's no way a team like the Jets that have so many roster holes and is not a win now team should be giving up a first round pick for this guy. I mean, certainly not the number 3 overall pick, or certainly not next year's first round pick. I mean, that would be asinine for this team.
Right.
So many other needs to fill in. Antonio Brown, like, for all of the headaches that Le'Veon Bell can bring, like, Antonio Brown's like on a different level. This guy could come in and completely, and he's a very talented player, but he could come in and completely destroy a young quarterback and the dynamic. I mean, this is supposed to be Darnold's team, and if this guy comes in and is a nightmare to deal with from a teammate perspective, that could just be such a problem. So, but I think it's a first round, probably a first round, second round pick. Jets don't even have a second round pick to give up if they wanted to. The price of contract, it's too much for a team that is not a win now team to go all in on a guy like that when they don't have the draft assets, and when they need those draft assets to roster build, because they haven't done a good enough job of roster building. So here they are, still rebuilding team, these picks, not giving them away. Especially when, look, I mean, maybe cynical Jets fans would say McKagan's better off giving away the picks than actually the picks, but yeah, that's sort of where they are. So they're not going to they're not in the Antonio Brown sweepstakes.
Any scenario, anything change from here in a couple weeks? Maybe the Steelers, decide, hey, we don't, and I'm with you on getting Antonio Brown. I don't want him anywhere near the Jets, but just for argument purposes, what if the price just comes down to the point where this, it's almost like a gift to the Jets to go get him? Do you see any situation where they might take a chance or a flyer on him if the price is right?
That's interesting. I think ideally they'd like to have a deal done here, and you and I are talking on Thursday night. And I think the date that they said they wanted to have a deal done is tomorrow.
It's Friday, yeah.
It's Friday. So maybe they're going to get that first round pick. Maybe I think they want him out of there by the March 17th, because that's when he's due the $500,000 roster bonus, or at least the first installment of the roster bonus. So no, I don't think it'll linger to the point where the price will get low enough for the Jets, especially considering the headaches and the red flags with this guy.
All right, so I'm gonna ask you to give me 2 guys. One guy that you would really want you really want this Jets you want to see the Jets sign. Like, this is a guy that if you're Mike McCagnon, you have to go get this guy. If you're serious about building this team up and making it a team that could possibly contend in the next coming years for a championship under Sam Darnold. Who's that guy? Who's that one guy in free agency that, helps that opportunity?
Well, I mean, I think it would be Bell on a talent level, and that would be the most obvious answer. But I think one guy to look at in terms of maybe a less obvious guy who could be just as critical, but on a quieter level than Bell, it would be Matt Paradis, the center from the Broncos. Because if you look at, I talked to Josh McCown about this at the end of the year, just kind of at his locker, and he talked about the importance of having a really good center for young quarterback and for the whole line, how critical that is. And what was kind of left, that obviously the Jets last year did not have a really good center, and the Jets in 2017 have a really good center like Wesley Johnson and Spencer Long. You're talking about back crummy centers that they had in the post Nick Mangold era, and Nick Mangold did so much for that line that I think Jets fans did appreciate it. So it's hard to say it was underappreciated, but maybe they took it for granted and forgot how critical it is to have that anchor in the middle, and maybe Paradis could be that guy for a few years for this team to kind of help Sam Darnold as a smart guy there, help this line get itself back on track. And so I think they obviously need a center, so they have to go get somebody, whether it's Mitch Morse or Matt Paradis. It will probably be one of those two guys. Morse has got some injury concerns, so Paradis I think would be the preference. And I think he would be a critical piece, not as sexy of a name as Le'Veon Bell, but certainly a critical piece.
And what's a guy that you want them to completely stay away from in free agency? Just a guy that just has bust written all over him.
A guy that that's an interesting one. I have to think about that. A guy that they should not go after in free agency. Okay.
Sorry to put you on the spot there.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I think that at corner there could be some guys that maybe I'll just put out a couple names here. I don't know if there's one guy that would stick out, but Cromartie wants to come back out of retirement. That's a big no for the Jets. That's one that's a big no. I think if you look at some of the other guys, like one guy who wants probably a lot of money in free agency and I think has a lot of red flags for me is Ronald Darby, the cornerback from the Eagles. And I mentioned cornerback off the top of my head, and I kind of had to go look at some names here, but Darby's pretty highly regarded. He wants money. The Jets already paid a ton of money last offseason for Tremaine Johnson. Darby's coming off a torn ACL. There's no reason they should be giving this guy big money. You might as well just re-sign Mo Claiborne on a one-year deal and figure out the cornerback spot next year in the draft, or try to draft a guy in round 3 this year or something like that. They have to address probably the slot cornerback position if they're going to let Buster Skrine go, because I think Perry Nickerson is not really there yet in terms of a guy you can trust as a starter. I think Bryce Callahan's a really interesting guy from the Bears that the Jets could target. But cornerback's a really interesting and polarizing position this year, because on one hand, you do have guys like Darby, who's coming off the injury, who's going to be asking for a ton of money, and I think the Jets should stay away from him. And then Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie, of course, who I kind of like tongue-in-cheek mentioned. But
we've already had enough Cromarties on the Jets. It's okay.
No doubt. But yeah, Bryce Callahan, I think, is a guy that they should really look into. I think he could be a productive slot cornerback for them. So they had their issues last year with Tremaine Johnson. So maybe that would be the position to avoid spending big on this year.
I have a name for you that I think it's interesting, and just you could tell me shut up, I'm wrong totally about it anytime. What about Landon Collins? I know the Jets have Marcus May. Marcus May is very talented, and he did have some injury issues this year, but for the most part, he's been a pretty good Jet. What about Landon Collins? It's rarely that you see a guy of the caliber of Landon Collins hit free agency. It looks like the Giants are completely letting him go. I kind of understand it because he doesn't fit James Betcher's defense apparently, but still, a guy 26, a Pro Bowler, guy as talented as he is, I can't imagine you letting him go like that. We're not even trying to make an effort to sign him. Maybe fantasy booking of sorts for the Jets, but is there any way that maybe on a decent deal that the Jets might inquire or pull or kick those tires?
I don't see it just because of the price and how much they've invested in terms of draft picks at that position. The interesting thing about May is he's had injury issues, right? So he's 2 years into his career. If he was 3 years into his career and going into the final year of his deal, and you kind of that's the rub here. If May has another rough year, this year in terms of injuries or production or whatever. And then you're looking at like, oh man, he's going to the final year of his deal and he hasn't produced. It's almost like he's too early to really know about.
Right.
And so maybe if this was if the last year was May's third year and he had not really produced a ton in terms of staying healthy and whatever, he had a pretty good rookie year. Then I think maybe the Jets could pull that trigger and say farewell to Marcus May or trade him off or whatever. But I just don't see it. The problem is, they've invested too much in that spot, and they also have so many other holes. And I mean, Landon Collins is going to get so much money in terms of what a team with a bigger safety need could give him. That I just don't see it for the Jets. But it would be interesting to see, like I said, if we're a year into the future and Marcus May, whatever, continue to be hurt. I mean, we certainly don't. I certainly don't wish that for him. But we'll see if he's able to return this year. And it's weird, the whole situation with Landon Collins. The Giants making no effort to I'm sure they gauged the price and decided it was too rich for them, but they're paying Eli Manning a whole lot of money to do God knows what this year. Well,
not to bury the lead, I'm a Jet fan with a Giant family. So, what are the Giants doing right now? I mean, where are they right now as a franchise? Are they, you kind of get the feeling that they're trying to maybe stick it out with Eli for one more year and give this current roster a go of it one more time. But then you're also getting feelers that they might be trying to rebuild. So, where are the Giants right now in your estimation?
I mean, they basically said they're going to do what the Chiefs did in 2017 and go get a young quarterback and let him sit behind the older quarterback and learn with, Alex Smith and Patrick Mahomes. And the Giants hope they can replicate that. And which I guess I kind of get, but, Eli Manning's cap number is so big this year that, like, why not just bring in a young guy and roll with him?
Right.
And then bring in some veteran backup. Or, a veteran to kind of compete with them like the Jets had with Sam Darnold. They draft a guy and, Josh McCown's there to quote unquote compete with them in training camp, but you kind of know where it's going. Right. If this guy's really good, if the quarterback you draft is really good and, throw him out there. Let him learn on the fly. So I just don't get the Eli Manning part of it. I mean, obviously they're gonna draft a quarterback, and as well they should. It's past due. They should have done it last year probably, even though they got a good player too. So it's an interesting time for the Giants.
So one would assume if they're trying to take the Kansas City Chiefs route, that they're not gonna even consider trading Odell Beckham, right? One would assume that, right?
I would be shocked. I think that they would have to get such a blow them away offer to do it, and that an offer that no team would be willing to give them. But yeah, I think Beckham stays.
Interesting. And I guess we could talk about that as you mentioned it a little bit. Have you ever seen a situation like Kyler Murray's situation at the combine this past weekend? Obviously Casterly came out with the big story that he just didn't test well at the combine. His interviews were terrible and he didn't do well at the board. From everything that you hear, is there some validity to that story, or is it just kind of draft spin or BS? I mean, where are you on the whole Kyler Murray situation?
I think you have to be careful, with what you put, stock into in the pre-draft process, because there's so much BS out there. And so much disinformation in the pre-draft process. So, who knows what's real and what's not. But, I don't know. I think it would be wild if the Cardinals drafted him first overall after taking Rosen last year. And I think it would be a terrible reflection on Steve Keim, their general manager. It's like, what are you doing?
Well, this is the same franchise that fired Steve Wilkes after 1 year. I mean, geez, I didn't think Steve Wilkes was this big time coach, but I mean, geez, at least you got to give the guy at least another year to prove that he's got something to work with.
Right. So they have some issues there that they have to get sorted out. But in terms of the Jets at number 3, I think it's interesting because if Kyler Murray does go 1, then you're looking at a situation where Nick Bosa probably goes 2, and then the Jets have to pick from probably between Josh Allen and Montez Sweat if you want an edge rusher, or Quinnen Williams, an interior defensive lineman at number 3. If Kyler Murray falls, then the Jets are in a position that maybe they could try to trade back out of their pick, or teams perhaps call their bluff and Kyler Murray falls to the Giants at 6 maybe. So it depends on what Murray shows here in the pre-draft process. He didn't work out at the combine, remember? So I think the Jets will potentially be left with a situation where, I would be stunned if they get Nick Bosa. But to get Quinn and Williams, if it goes Bosa Williams, then they're probably looking at maybe Josh Allen or Montez Sweat and edge rushers. So it's going to be probably one of those, I would guess one of those two with Quinn and Williams or Josh Allen, depending on how the draft falls. Or maybe the Jets, I think they'd love to trade back, get a second round pick, get back that pick that they lost in the Darnold trade. And still maybe get a better player or pretty good player later in the first round. So, but Quinn Williams, I think, interior defensive lineman typically doesn't get a lot of recognition, but this guy's really, really, really good. You watch his tape and he's so disruptive. So, I think the Jets would be fine living with that pick.
Interesting. Yeah. I'm kind of leaning towards trading back. That's just my feeling right now. I mean, it may change by the time we get to the draft, but right now I kind of feel like, if the deal is out there, I think trading back wouldn't be such a bad idea. I wouldn't want to trade completely out of the top 10, but just trading back a couple spots. I mean, anyway, you see the Giants just completely falling in love with Haskins or feeling pressured to get Haskins. I mean, you talked about them trying to do the Kansas City Chiefs model.
Right.
Well, as you remember, Kansas City traded up to get Mahomes. Any chance? And I know there's always been tension between the two franchises, but do you see any way where the Giants call the Jets on draft day or a couple weeks before and say, hey, what would it take for us to move up to 6 or to 3?
Well, yeah, I think the interesting part is like the Jaguars at 7. What were they going to do now that they're going to get Nick Foles? Does that that probably decreases the likelihood that they would be nipping at the Giants' heels to get a quarterback? So, the Nick Foles to the Jaguars thing kind of hurts the Jets a little bit in terms of the teams in that top 10 who could be in demand for the 3rd pick. So would the Dolphins trade up from 13, the Bengals from 11? That's a long way to go to get to 3, and that's a steep price. So maybe the Giants could do it if they get skittish. If, say, Kyler Murray is gone at 1 and then they think another team could go there to 3, maybe the Giants do it. But I don't think the Jets are going to do it preemptively like the Colts did last year with the Jet deal. I think the Jets would be smart to wait and see what happens with the first couple picks and then decide if they want to deal the pick. Because if Nick Bosa is going to be there for you at 3 and you've already dealt the pick, you're going to be kicking yourself. So, so I think that's how they should do it. Play it out, let it play out, and then see what happens. And I think the other teams would be, I think the Giants would be on board with that. But I think, the Jets would be willing to do a deal with the Giants, no doubt.
Ideally, who would you pick at that number 3 spot? It sounds like you're really into Quinn Williams over Josh Allen. Of course, Bosa's on another level, but ideally, if you were Mike McCagnon and you were sitting there in the war room on draft day, who's the guy that you're just praying that falls to you?
Well, I mean, you're praying, I think, that Bosa does, but if Bosa doesn't, and if you don't trade the pick, then I'm really torn between Josh Allen and Quinn Williams from things. But from everything that all the analysts are saying is that Williams is a better player. He gives you the ability to stop the run in the interior in addition to pushing the pocket, and did it at a really high level. Now, he and Josh Allen both really took huge steps. Allen played in the SEC too. Took huge steps this year after being, this year being 2018 last year, after being lesser players in 2017 than they were in 2018. So, Quinn Williams and Josh Allen don't have a huge track record of success, but they've done it at a high level. And I think Williams would be the guy there because he can help you stop the run. And the Jets were really, really bad against the run last year. So that's got to be a concern for them and one area that they need to try to fix. But of course, Bosa is the guy that they're just keeping their fingers crossed that he falls.
And I don't know how much draft tape you've watched on all these guys. I'm sure you're getting ready to do that as the weeks, get closer to the draft. But who's one guy outside of the usual suspects at the top? Who's one guy that you're keeping an eye on? A guy not just necessarily for the Jets or the Giants or anybody, but just in general, just a guy that you really like from just everything that you've heard and followed and watched tape of, that you really think could be a monster and a steal in this draft.
Well, I think DK Metcalf was going toward being less and less of a steal after what he did at the combine, but he was a guy that, if you look at, he's not going to be a guy that the Jets are going to take at 3, and he might go in the first round, but he's not going to be a 3rd round pick for the Jets. But in terms of just overall, he was a guy who was very much a wild card because of his injury history in college, but really impressed at the combine. So maybe he's less of a kind of a dark horse type guy now, but he's a fascinating guy to see in this pre-draft process.
Awesome. So it sounds like it's going to be a pretty interesting next couple weeks. Are you expecting a crazy week next week with all this free agency stuff?
No doubt. Yeah, it always is. Well,
I think I speak for a lot of Jet fans, man. We really appreciate your work and everything that you do. and keeping us informed and getting us, getting news and stuff out there. So, just from, I don't know, I don't speak for the millions of Jets fans out there, but I at least for one Jet fan, man, thank you for all the work you do, man. It's
no problem.
Read and a watch, man.
Well, before you go, for that. Appreciate you saying it. Thanks for having me on.
Before you go, man, go ahead and plug your website, plug NJ.com, Star Ledger, your social media, all that. Where can Jet fans and non-Jet fans find you?
Yeah, so it's nj.com/Jets on Twitter, pretty simple. And then, or on the internet. And then on Twitter, it's at Darryl Slater, Darryl Slater on Twitter. So appreciate everyone reading and following. Appreciate you reading and the kind words and for taking the time to chat about this tonight and have me on. So, yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate it.
No, thank you for giving me. We were only supposed to do about 30 minutes, and here we are talking almost 50 minutes in. So I thank you for your time, man. I appreciate it, man.
Of course, anytime.
Yo, what's up, everybody? If you're a real fan of Any Given Sunday, then you have to become a member of our exclusive Facebook page, AGS Nation. AGS Nation is a special Facebook group page where real fans of the podcast can connect with me and other hardcore sports fans. Now, I must warn you, anything goes on this page. Guys post the funniest, most thought-provoking, and sometimes even offensive posts, memes in the sports universe. So if you're a little bit of weak at heart, do not join this page. But if you're a real hardcore fan of the show, join me, connect with me directly on AGS Nation. Don't hesitate, but beware, it goes down in AGS Nation. Peace out. My thanks again to Darryl for joining me this week on the podcast. Please make sure you go follow him on Twitter at Darryl Slater. Check out his work at nj.com, njadvancedmedia.com, and of course, thestarledger.com. Follow us on Twitter at AGS Pod, on Instagram, AGS Podcast, on Facebook, Any Given Sunday. Follow me on Twitter at The Emmanuel Brown, on Instagram, The Emmanuel Brown, and then of course on Snapchat, MannyBro15. As always, thank you for listening, subscribing, and supporting the show. Without you guys, the listeners, there is no podcast. So thank you for listening each and every week and supporting the show as much as you guys do. Like I mentioned at the beginning, this is the first of two shows. The next show I'll have tomorrow will feature Harrison Fagan. He is the editor-in-chief and podcaster for Silver Screen and Roll, and I've been wanting to have him on in a while as well. So I got two guys that I've been wanting to have on the show for a while now, and I booked them back to back. So it should be a good show. We're going to talk about the disaster that is the Los Angeles Lakers. I'm sure you guys will be looking forward to me ranting and raving with Harrison about the demise of the 2018-2019 Los Angeles Lakers. But until then, thank you for listening, thank you for supporting, and thank you for enjoying the podcast. And I'll have this show up here in the next few hours, and hope you guys enjoy it. Catch you guys tomorrow with another episode of the podcast. Peace.
Serious.